Washington, D.C., Professor Giorgio Cafiero, who's a professor at the Georgetown University. Professor, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. Now, we just heard this statement by the Israeli Prime Minister, where he wished him on his birthday, and he also reiterated the support that he had got from the American president in carrying out this Operation Rising Lion. He went on to state something that Israel has always been saying: our enemies are your enemies, our friends are your friends. And this is an operation that the Israelis could not have done without the help of the Americans. Can Donald Trump, who had been negotiating with the Iranians for a nuclear deal, now deny that he did not want these attacks to take place?
Yeah, first of all, really good to be with you. Always an honor to be a guest on this program. It's really clear that Prime Minister Netanyahu is doing everything he can to bring the United States into this conflict, even more so than the U.S. is currently involved in it. Netanyahu wants nothing more than for the U.S. to really take out the Iranian regime, completely dismantle its nuclear program, and do certain things that the U.S. military is capable, theoretically, of doing, but the Israeli military doesn't have the means to do so. So this kind of flattery and happy birthday wishes need to be understood within that particular context. Now, there is no doubt that the Israeli strikes that initiated this new war on the 13th of this month, yesterday, those were only possible because Washington gave Tel Aviv a green light, or at least a yellow light. All the details about what Washington knew, what Washington was involved with, I don't have all of that information. Right. I think over time the public will become more aware of all the details. But what we can say with absolute certainty is that Israel only acted with some degree of approval from the United States, from the Trump administration.
Absolutely. Now, one of the interesting statements that the Israeli Prime Minister also made, that he said that the leaders of the Ayatollah's regime are packing their bags in Tehran because of the complete air superiority that the Israelis have now been able to establish over the Iranian skies. This clearly indicates that the Israeli intention is a regime change in Iran. To what extent do you think the American leadership will buy into this idea of an Israeli-led regime change in Iran?
I'm not so sure that the Trump administration is going to want to get involved in the business of regime change in any country in the Middle East. To be sure, we have to always consider domestic politics here in the United States when we're looking at Trump's base, and also beyond Trump's base, looking at the American electorate at large. There's really no appetite for that. However, as I'm sure your viewers know very well, sometimes when the U.S. gives Israel blind support, uncritical support, the U.S. can get tugged into conflicts where Israel's in the driver's seat. So I think unless the Trump administration is going to set some red lines with the Israelis and put some pressure on Israel, rein in Israel, there is a real possibility that the United States will get lured into a conflict that the Trump administration might not necessarily even want.
Right, interesting. And also the French president, Emmanuel Macron, has put out a tweet where he has said the way to de-escalate from this crisis is for the Iranians to, in fact, get back to the negotiating table. But the question is, of course, this: these negotiations that were happening, were they even happening in good faith? Because the key nuclear negotiator from the Iranian side, he has been killed in a decapitation strike by the Israelis. With that being the case, do you think these negotiations, even if they happen from here on, would be done in good faith by the Western nations?
Those are great questions. I think the answers are quite obvious. No, the United States was not acting in good faith when negotiating with the Iranians. I think it's pretty clear that this was sort of camouflage diplomacy, if you will. The next round of talks is scheduled to take place tomorrow. And despite that, the U.S. obviously signed off on Israel's strikes on Iran Friday morning. So there's no way that one can argue that the United States was engaged in these negotiations in a good faith manner. Now, in terms of Macron's call on Tehran to come back to the roundtable and to resume negotiations, this is a little ridiculous. I mean, Iran would have no reason to think that there's anything to be gained from negotiating with the United States. I think what's much more likely at this point is Iran is going to refuse to engage Washington diplomatically and pull out of the NPT and become a nuclear armed state. I think that's much more of a likely outcome of this war than a resumption of diplomacy. I think for the foreseeable future, American-Iranian diplomacy is dead.
I think that's a very crucial point, because it's difficult to see as to how diplomacy can happen at a time when the two nations, that is Iran and Israel, have gone up so dramatically on the escalation ladder. And the United States of America, although initially it pretended that it was not aware of the Israeli attacks, seems to have been clearly hand in glove. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Kefero, for joining us with that perspective there.
Good to be with you. Thank you.